Hello. Thank you for the presentation and thank you guys for joining in. I wanted to really talk about this solar eclipse new moon because it was very strong in my life. And that's how I get the inspiration to talk about certain topics in astrology when I get this cathartic experience because mental only doesn't serve. So I pick up that particular topic, breaking mirrors. It could be a counterintuitive when it's about Libra, because we know that the new moon happens in the sign of Libra. But I intend to explain why I picked up that that title. Also, in this first slide, I added the Cardinal archetype. As you can see, the Aries, Libra, Capricorn, Cancer. And because I really want to base all the talks about the charts based on that archetype, because the lunation is happening in one of those points, and because I strongly think, and I think it because I've noticed it when I work with my chart and when I work with clients, how the archetypes, those quadrants, are very important and they sustain. It's almost like the underlying structure of what's happening. So if we have something happening in one of those points, it always affects all these other the rest of the cardinal, the rest of the quadrant, depending on where it falls in, of course, in every one of us charts / lives. So I want to show you, of course, that's the lunation, the solar moon, the solar eclipse. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of explain how I'm going to approach it is I'm going to approach it from the whole, and then we're going to go to the details, because I think generally when we're talking about, when we're trying to do any interpretation of whatever is happening in our life, again, / charts, we have to base it on the very essential archetypes, because it starts from there. And in this case, we have to consider all these different, it's almost like a different lenses that need to be put together. And then we have to pull out the essence of what's going on, the synthesis. So what we have to synthesize in this case is the fact that solar eclipse is happening in the cardinal archetype, in the cardinal quadrant. Then from that cardinal quadrant, the 4 points, we are pulling one particular polarity, and that's the polarity of Aries and Libra, and that's the nodal axis, right? So we also have the ruler of the north node conjunct the south node, which is a peculiar thing. Then we have the idea of the new moon, which happens on the south node, but the very idea of new moon gives us also the urge to act, to initiate something. And then we also have the skip step, plural, not just any planet, to the nodes. We also have all the conjunctions happening clustered on the new moon, and then the Libra archetype out of it, which again, I'm going to talk about the mirrors in relation to the Libra and the aspect. So those are the things that we have to take into consideration. It's obvious we do, but I wanted to kind of instigate the idea how important it is to start from the general and then go to the specifics, so that we can keep the idea of wholeness going on. And that's going to help us to actually get a more precise idea of what this is happening and what this is calling for, in terms of taking actions or just integration of some sort of some form of our, or some facet of our own consciousness. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start from the cardinal archetype, the polarity principle, then the sign of Libra. We're going to review some past dynamics related to the Libra, or the cliches related to Libra. Again, that's going to be applied in your charts review. Then what is building pressure when it has to do with eclipses, because we know that this is very charged periods in the collective, and of course they apply to us as well. And then what's the call for, what is the new expression call for? So I want to start again, as I said, with this. Oops. Cardinal archetype. We know the cardinal archetype has 4 points. Every archetype of the quadrant has 4 points. We have the fixed and we have the mutable. So the idea of quaternity, what it means, and then it contains within itself the idea of center. And many times in astrologers, we forget that the chart is actually able to be pulled out because there is a center. And what is the center if we talk about not just the chart, but our own life? It's the center where the life emanates from. And if we think about us as that life, as a consciousness that's projected itself into the 3D reality, we can talk about ourselves as a pure energy. So that archetype is universal. It's not only universal, and that's, of course, it's notable. It's in the Indian Americans cosmology. It's in all kind of shamanic cosmology. It's also something that's been very deeply explored in the alchemist texts. And the person that came up with the observation of how important this is, the idea of the 4, because every wholeness as an archetype contains 4 points, is Jung, of course, the psychologist. So for him, and of course for him, not because he wants to, but because of the observation that he reached, observation that he's gathered, and also reflection onto his own life, the idea is that an image with a 4-fold structure, usually a square or a circle structure, points to the idea of wholeness. So it's Jeffrey Wolf Green that says that the zodiac, the way we know it in our world, contains the potentiality of reaching the highest level of consciousness when reachable in human form. So what is that if not wholeness? So Jung had recognized that the fourth elements, because he had done some investigation on the Christianity in the olden times, and then again the alchemist texts and Hindu, and also the Native Americans and some tribes in Africa. So he has noticed that there is similarities in the core of those archetypes. And he had identified that what the church did is pulled one of those elements away. We all know about the Christianity and the idea of Trinity. What is the 4th element? So he recognized that the 4th needs to be integrated in order for the whole to be achieved. And so he saw that his patients are actually lacking that wholeness. And they're lacking the wholeness because our consciousness/energy gets engaged with all kinds of things that are not natural for us, whether this is going to be a technological advance or material possessions, or we're cut from the true idea of society and also the true idea of nature. And so that makes our wholeness dissipate or fragment. So the characteristic of fullness, what is fullness? What is wholeness? It's inner unity of harmony. That's fundamentally the ability to unify disparate and even contradictory elements in harmonious whole. Think about that. Like, what is the astrological chart? And especially looked from the perspective of evolutionary astrology. It has opposites, and those opposites complement each other. So, sorry, a little faster here. So those are the general quadrants that we have, and all of them are pulled and emanated from the center. So there is a gravity to hold that, to all that. So what I'm saying is that if an action is happening in one of those points, regardless of which quadrant we're going to talk about, whatever is happening there, whether we're receiving a transit from a planet, whether there is a very heavy signature in our chart in one of those points, the actions that are happening, the triggers that we're experiencing there, There is always a reverberation that happens in the other points, whatever they are in their life, again, / chart. So, and the other thing why those 4 points are very important and you need to be reviewed as a wholeness when we're interpreting whatever transits or whatever progressions or whatever lunations are happening, how they're affecting our life, is because they have a very solid connection to the center. And again, we have to remember that every angular relationship between planets in our chart, in any zodiacal wheel, is possible. Angular relationship is possible only related to the center. So the question is, our consciousness or our pure energy or whatever we are before we emanate in our lives is actually projecting the energy and setting up the stage for certain play out with those energies. And there is another kind of similar idea that I want to use, and that's from the color wheel. So if we take this one arm from the Cardinal archetype, because we have to talk about Cardinal archetype since Aries and Libra are part of it, we're not going to talk about the Capricorn and Cancer because that's not activated, but it doesn't mean that it disappears. It just stays there. It's just not active. So the polarity principle applies, of course, applies to every one of those dualities that are engaged in the quadrant. So the interesting part is that the 2 colors that are opposite each other in the traditional color wheel are considered complementary. Just think about the color wheel in terms of astrological chart. So complementary colors, when they're juxtaposed next to each other, they enhance their color. And that's what contrast comes from. So the reason I'm mentioning this is, it's always easy when you want to communicate an idea and then you use analogous principles. But considering that we're going to talk about a new moon, and that new moon falls, the only reason that the lunar eclipses and solar eclipses are called that way is because they're heavily engaged with the nodal axis. So the nodal axis, as we know, the nodal axis of the moon is always 180 degrees apart. So there is that polarity. And how can we approach polarity if you think about that? We usually talk about going from one place to another, from the south node to the north node, and north node to the south node, depending on which planet is squaring the nodes and all that. But just for the sake of this presentation, just think about that polarity as a vibration field that gives you an opportunity to bounce back and forth of the contrast that they provide, so that our consciousness in certain areas gets a little bit calibrated, like gets refined. So it's interesting that, again, if we're talking about Aries and Libra and every polarity, we can think about it as a complementary pair of one axis of consciousness. And of course, what's the axis that we're all exposed to and feeling the energies of is our identity and how we share that identity. Right. But can we exclude that axis, our identity and how we share our identity, from the other pair of the axis, which is not activated supposedly, or at least there's no nodes in that, but it's part of the cardinal one, and those are the Cancer and Capricorn. Because what happens if we cannot express our identity, and what is the reason for it? We're either repressed, or there is some restrictions in terms of Capricorn, or we don't feel secure to do that in terms of Cancer. And the same thing happens if we look at the other opposite sign, which is Libra. What's going to happen if I am not able to express my identity in relationships and initiate relationships from the point of my strong identity? Then what's going to suffer is going to be my integrity, which is Capricorn. And again, they're connected. Or the reason I'm not doing this can be reviewed as some sort of lack of emotional security. I'm not secure of who I am. So my point is that when we're going to be looking at those different points in our chart, it's always helpful to calibrate and see where the others are, because that's going to help us identify what is the call specifically. So it's interesting also just to looking at this slide. Jung, again, the psychologist, had expressed the importance of balancing the opposing forces of the psyche, well, psyche, soul, of course, one and the same, as the path toward integration. What is it that we are trying to achieve in our life? The more integrated part, the more parts of ourselves that are dissociated and fragmented due to all kinds of different variety of experience, either in our childhood or in past lives, whoever believes in them. Those parts of us, the more we integrate those parts of us, the more wholeness we achieve, and the more wholly we can live our lives, the life that really resonates to us, as opposed to a life that we don't want to live, but we're kind of stuck into it. And so this is a process of individuation based on psychology, or becoming fully integrated with all the parts of the psyche. So those lunations and the nodal axis transits that we're experiencing on an everyday basis are calibration to gathering those parts of ourselves and integrating them. They're actually helping, and they're helping from the areas that they're transiting our chart / life in. So it is the opposition that creates a power. That's according to Jung, but it's interesting to think about it. Power / libido, which is the energy that we come here with to explore life. And it is like two poles of a battery. Again, that's his words, or the splitting of an atom. So how strong this energy is, and how important it is for us to understand the healthy expression of polarity and contrast. Because through polarity and contrast, those nodes are running in constant connection to our own emotional nature, the moon, because they do belong to the moon. So now, as we cover the quadrant and then the polarity, one arm of it, I want to just briefly touch on the Libra archetype. And we know all the cliches out there about the Libra, and that's the cooperative, polite, fair-minded, and justice, intellectual. All of this we do know. But what I want to really focus on when we're talking about Libra here, specifically because we're talking about a south node in Libra, that's what's happening in the sky. And that's what the solar eclipse was about. We're talking about the past dynamics of Libra, the past dynamics that need recalibration. Because the south node is in Libra. So it's something in the Libra consciousness, the Libra expression, that is not serving us anymore. And so if we're looking at, again, the general cardinal archetype, which Libra is part of, what could be those potential past dynamics that we're called to and feel the pressure to change? Obviously, when we're talking about Libra, we're talking about relationships, because the most important thing is to initiate those relationships. It's a calibration of the entire facets of this archetype: our emotional security, our integrity, and our identity. But in the past, have we been able to express our needs in relationship? Have we been able to communicate from the position of our own integrity? Have we been able to calibrate the identity, or we just were able to split that identity because we had to be different people for different, a different person for different people? And what happened to our integrity in that way? Where is the fear? What is the fear based on? So these are the dynamics that we naturally feel pushed to explore. And of course, we cannot be completely detailed if we don't have the actual house that this whole action is happening. So when I'm talking so far, what I have been expressing is literally matching the Libra archetype with the 7th house and then the Aries archetype with the 1st house. But when we include the houses, which is something that we cannot not do, because otherwise we're not going to be clear in that exploration, we understand that the house is the first place that we have to look, because that's the area of life where these urges are happening. And then the Libra shows us the way in which we have to review them, or in the way they're happening, and the rest of the Cardinal archetype as well. So the idea of mirrors, and why I want to talk about smashing mirrors, really, because we're called to review something in regards to relating. So the South Node may be crossing your 1st house, maybe in your 2nd house, and the 3rd house. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's about relationship, but it's the way you relate to yourself, 1st house, or the way you relate to your own value, or the way you relate to your own desires, or the way you relate to the way you speak out, or the way you relate to your past family conditioning, or your sense of security and what it's based on. So this is a little calibration that we need to do when it's about houses, and houses are, again, the first thing that we have to take into consideration. So considering that we're talking about the past conditioning in terms of Libra consciousness, because the South Node is in that sign, how important it is, and especially because the new moon happens in that sign as well. So it's a paradox, because we have the North Node is in Aries, but then the ruler of this North Node happens to tightly conjunct the South Node and also the new moon. The new moon itself, it's asking for action and for initiation, but we have to initiate something in a different way, in terms of relating. So because, and why is this needed? Obviously it's coming to us, it's coming in our life because it needs to happen, because our consciousness has to be calibrated and geared more towards who we are. So what do mirrors do to us? Because there is a saying that Libra is always looking for the reflection in order to figure out what it is. Well, mirrors could be good, it could be bad. So mirrors in terms of reflection, obviously, yes, they're reflecting our image, but do mirrors really reflect our true image or self? And can we differentiate from real from unreal? And so this is a painting. I don't know who painting belongs to, and if somebody's watching this and know, you can let us know, and we can put the artist in the notes. But as we see in this painting, there's 3 different mirrors, and the mirrors are giving a different image of that person. So in terms of us looking at mirroring in our relationships or in any aspect of life, sometimes, especially with a very deeply ingrained Libra consciousness, we may get confused as to who exactly we are and which image we should have to trust. Obviously, if we are to the point where we cannot make the choice, or we cannot figure out what is our true image, then there is obviously a disconnection from the core, from the source, from the essence of who we are. So that calibration is needed, but it could be detrimental to us, especially related to past dynamics. The other thing that mirrors do is they can give us different perspective, but they can give it, depending on how you look at the mirror. Of course, you can like your image full face, or you may not like your back, or you may not like your profile. Again, different mirrors show us different sides of us. What are mirrors in our life? Different people that we communicate with or interact with, different situations that we find ourselves in our life, different happenings. So can we accept parts that we don't like because they're reflected, they're given a perspective from the other mirror that we are mirroring ourselves into? Or we can trust that the sides shown to us do belong to ourselves. Can we trust that? So again, in the Libra consciousness, that could be very confusing, and that can contribute to us not being able to really gather the true image of who we are, and not being able to initiate relationships from the true image of who we are if we continue to get this as a face value, whatever the feedback that we're getting from the mirrors in our life. In a way, everything is mirrors. So the other thing that mirrors do is actually projection. So think about the mirrors in your life. What happens when the other side, whether this is a situation or a setting or a person, projects their own persona or a material, their own material onto you? Well, you basically disappear. I mean, in those pictures, in those, I think they're pictures, photos, we're not talking about another person, we're talking about environment, but still, it works the same way. So somebody else projects their own material onto us, we disappear. If our identity is not strong, there could be a huge damage onto us. And do we want to continue to propagate that type of feeling that we're feeling? Again, we're talking about feelings and emotions because we're talking about eclipses. And eclipses have to do with lunation close to the north and the south node of the moon. So that's another thing that we need to think in terms of how we're perceiving the people that we're interacting with because of the Libra idea, the Libra energy. So the other, and that's the last way I wanted to review the mirrors, is portals. There's this idea out there, the mirrors are portals because of the way they translate the light. So refract, I think is the right word, I'm not sure. So those photos are from The Matrix, of course, last episode, and also from Alice in Wonderland, I think the last book, which is Through a Looking Glass. So mirrors in our life, people, situations, perceiving yourself through someone else's eyes, sometimes, again, when we don't have a strong essence of who we are, gets us sucked in their perception, in their reality. And of course, that happens because of our weak identity. So there is this potentiality of being lost in somebody else's ideas. Or the other possibility in that situation is not buying into the reflection in the mirror and moving beyond the projected truth about reality or about ourselves. So which one would it be? Because we have this new moon in the Libra, and the action needs to happen in regards to some past dynamic or past experience. It's important for us to break those mirrors. And I think, let me see what's next here. So yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit generally about this, and then we're going to start looking at the charts, I believe. So again, it's important to note, not that we don't know it, but we have the north node of the moon. It's of the moon in Aries, and then the ruler of this north node is conjunct the south node. The south node is in Libra, and we have the new moon right there together with Mercury. And again, that Mars is the ruler of the north node. I choose that chart, it's from Cafe Astrology, because it doesn't have the houses. And because I'm not talking about specific charts, it's important not to confuse people, because again, the houses is extremely important. They have to be discussed first and then the sign, because the sign conditions the house and the planet in it, or the point. So what we're having here is obviously an action needs to be taken, an action that action has to stem from our essence. So the desire to act, the pure desire, the instinct to act on something that is coming to us from the past, that doesn't need to be a real person, or it doesn't need to be a real situation. The idea about the eclipses, because they're connected to, again, new moon or full moon, because they're connected to the nodes of the moon, they're extremely emotionally charged, because the moon is what it is. It's our emotional nature. And so because the nodes are calibrating our emotionality, because that's how we perceive the world through, then around eclipses, we might find ourselves emotionally charged. There are certain emotions that are brewing to the surface. And that emotion is actually grounded, becomes grounded in the thought. The thought has to do with, again, past situation that's coming in our consciousness. Why is it coming into our consciousness? Because there is something that was unfinished or was not done in the right way to be redone or to be corrected or whatever it feels like. But we need to take action, and that action needs to happen in terms of relating, and that relation has to happen in a certain area of life, whatever that falls into our charts. But considering that the action factor is, again, the pull to express that identity that was not able to be expressed, or it was expressed in not the right way and didn't deliver the right message. Now we have this deep, deep searching of acting on behalf of that depth that was not able to be expressed, to be super honest, something that we were not able to do before, or to communicate, or to write. And that, again, is something that we were not able to do before. And then that need to act or write or communicate or reveal information will always exaggerate or wake up that wound. Because again, Chiron is exactly, was at that lunation, was exactly opposite the Mercury. And then that whether or not we're going to act, we have acted already, or this is something that is still brewing on the back of our consciousness, we're going to feel absolutely insecure about doing it because it's not something that we've done before. And that Mercury is in a new conjunction to the moon, so it's icky. It's not something that we've done before. And so if we look at the planet squaring the nodes, which happens to be Pluto, and again, in this case, we're just going to assume that the planet, the signs are matching the houses. If we look at that, I'm jumping the horse a little bit here, but that's the general, let's say, meaning, the general ideas. So what happens when we have a planet that's squaring the nodes? We know what EA says about it. They're interrupting the movement from the south node to the north node, or vice versa, depending on which side it's squaring it. There is this flip-flopping, which was noted on many occasions. But what is a skip step? Just think about it. When you are skipping step in the normal way of walking in your life, or you're skipping a page of a book that you're reading, just think about that. So when we skip a step, or a step on the stairs that we're climbing on coming down on, so what this causes is, first of all, our attention is not there, or if it was there, it was perceiving something different, right? So why it was perceiving something different? We were not in the reality. We were outside of the reality. We were in the midst of something that has come before, that we're projecting into the future, or we're afraid, or we're scared, or we're so the skip step in our naturally living our life or walking causes us to either fall or get injured, or just have this knee-jerk reaction of, oh, I almost fell down. And so if we're climbing the steps, when we skip a step, in order to get to where we are, we have to do extra effort. So that extra effort pulls more muscles. So in that way, if we're looking at that Pluto in Capricorn, almost less degrees, that is squaring this node, the nodes of the consciousness that has to do with identity and how this identity has been expressed in terms of relating, then what is the call here? And why we were not able to do that? And what is going to be the factor that's going to make us feel uncomfortable doing that? Obviously, it has to do with our past conditioning. It has to do with very deeply ingrained ideas of insecurity in terms of, can I do that? Or am I going to be judged? Or anything that has to do with that idea. And so that step, and because our consciousness is very deeply engaged into feeling the insecurity of that, it's a Pluto placement. So we'll see where it falls in your own chart, because we know that wherever Pluto goes, it needs total transformation. And of course, transformation is going to be needed because it's needed in your consciousness to improve your life. So, but it brings with itself the most deeper insecurities and the most deeper holding to the old truth that is not necessarily truth, is a habit. So that's why in that lunation, in that new moon solar eclipse, the need to act in that particular field we will feel the insecurity of it, because it has to do with determining a new way of expressing our own not identity, but integrity. So we're going to talk about the rest of it, the rest of the aspects in relation to your charts, because I don't want to spend more time on that. I just want to do this last notes here, and that would be building pressure to initiate change, right? Because those are the eclipses. As I said, the eclipses have to do with the points of the moon, and those points are evolutionary points, and they're constantly changing because we're constantly having the potentiality of changing something in our life that is not necessarily working. So the moon has to do with the life on a day-to-day basis. Our ego, we do need to have ego, because otherwise we're not going to be able to focus. If we are this consciousness that is all perceiving and all experiencing and understand, we're not going to be able to pull some sort of experience in a sequential way. So ego, that's the moon, quality of our emotional nature, and self-consistency and image, because the quality of our emotional nature and the emotions that we're so used to experiencing are determining our self-image. If we are coming from a disparity of some sort, how is this going to contribute to our image? Of course, we're not going to be so thrilled with who we are, because we're always going to perceive ourselves as having some sort of lack. So receptivity to parental and societal influences, of course, that's tied to all of it, and how we nurture ourselves, that's the moon. And so the constant movement of the nodes is actually calibrating all this. So what is an emotion? I want to talk about here something that Joe Dispenza talks about, and I think that we have to integrate in our studies of astrology, in our looking at astrology, especially evolutionary astrology, all the new findings in the area of quantum physics, of neurobiology, of neuroscience, of what else? Everything that's out there, because the reason we have those new findings is because our consciousness expands and we understand more how those things work. So I have to talk about the emotion. Probably it's not in a new way. Probably some of you are familiar with that work. It's a scientific work. Emotion is energy in motion. I mean, he didn't have to say that for us to, think about it, but it's energy. Emotion is energy. Let's approach the whole conversation from that perspective. And we know that moon is very tied to our emotions. We are who we are based on how we are perceiving the world through our emotional center. So eclipses are very energetically charged periods, because they steer our emotions. Now, we're conditioned to think that happenings in our environment cause us to feel one way or another, or to experience certain type of emotions. So we are basically a victim of the environment or the people that we're interacting with. But based on the work of this guy and also the Heart Institute, I think Braden is the name, there is also other absolutely unrelated theories. I don't think they're theories, but findings that actually prove that is it appears that emotions are actually stored energy patterns within us. So that get triggered by events and people. What does that mean, stored energy patterns? So obviously when we come into this world, we perceive energy. We don't perceive the things that we don't perceive the face of the mother. We don't perceive our crib. We don't perceive that. We perceive energy fields. Then later with language and with the conditioning, we start to see the world the way it is. Now, early in life, we start perceiving those energy fields, and those energy fields constitute certain type of emotion. So if we have a good connection with somebody, whether it's going to be a grandpa or grandma or a mother or a father, well, some of them may not be that good of emotional connection from the get-go, we perceive that energy pattern. It translates into emotion. So, and then later on, we forget. Emotions are certain translations of reality, because reality in its purest way, purest existence, is a vibrational energy. So they produce certain chemicals in the body. And this is something that, I mean, I'm very thankful to this guy that came up with it through the investigation and through all kinds of scientific research and measurement. But the shamans have always known that emotions have a chemical equivalent in the body. And so what happens is that when we experience one emotion over and over again, then that creates a chemical in the body that is relative to that emotion. So the problem with all that is we have a tendency to get addicted to negative emotions. I'm talking about this because of the eclipses and how they steer our emotions. So we have a tendency to get addicted to negative emotions more easily than the positive ones. That sounds not too logical, but it is if you think about how we get addictive to bad foods, to foods that are not natural, sweeteners and all this stuff. Now, that happens because that not natural food is actually producing extra reaction in our body. And that extra reaction is so strong that it causes us to experience a hype. And so if this gets continued and it happens on a regular basis, that hype is something that is addictive because it's not natural. So our body need more of it. And so that's happening on an emotional level. The emotional energy stays in the body and needs to sustain itself through attracting situations in people that would trigger its existence and produce more of it. It's literally an addiction as it is to drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, sex, whatever, all of this. So that's why many times we find ourselves in one of the same situations, not that the situation is beneficial to our well-being, but because of the emotion that's been registered deep within us, and we have gotten so used to it that it needs to propagate itself, it needs to continue to feed off itself. So because eclipses are lunations that engage the moon nodes, they start building pressure, which translates into triggering of particular emotion within us. Of course, if we're living our life in a very busy way, that's not necessarily something that we're going to feel viscerally. But sometimes it happens through triggering certain events around those periods. So the triggered emotion, particular emotion, needs a release. Why? Because it needs to be reviewed, it needs to be figured out what it is, where it comes from, what it's causing us, and then to be integrated. When it's integrated, that tension is released. So the way I can exemplify this, I think that's the last slide before the charts, but I want to, let me see for sure. Yes, okay. So I'm not going to talk about this chart. We're going to move to charts, but I want to exemplify what I'm talking about. And I think last time when I did the presentation, and I think it was solar eclipse in Aries, but I'm not quite sure, I gave an example of how our perceptual system is giving us an interpretation of certain realities. So, and I think the example that I gave was you go to a bookstore and then the person there is quite rude and he tells you don't stop looking through this book because you're bending the pages and that's not going to sell, so can you put the book down? Different people, depending on what the predominant emotion was in their own upbringing, can have a different response to that particular situation. So if I am a bookstore owner, I can definitely understand that person and I can, understand their point and say that I am and I understand what they're saying and we can get into a conversation. That's how my interpretation of the reality is, through the emotions, because that particular situation will trigger emotion I'm used to. If I'm somebody that is not into feeling, I don't have within myself the emotion of feeling less than, or that I don't know what I'm doing and I'm stupid, I can just understand that this person is kind of rude and I don't want to engage in that. And I don't really care about this book. I was just looking. And so I can put the book down and say, thank you, have a good day, and leave and just forget about the situation, because that situation doesn't resonate to something that I'm used to experiencing. But if I'm somebody that in childhood, past lives, whatever, have ingrained emotion or emotion that's part of my own biology and my own energy field that has to do with feeling unappreciated or feeling constantly criticized or feeling like I'm not doing whatever I do, I don't do it right, then that particular trigger will trigger me tremendously. And so the emotion will come. Who do you think I am? Do you think that I don't know how to handle books? That's ridiculous. I'll storm out of the bookstore. And then until a couple of days later, I'll keep talking about that situation because it has triggered that emotion. Now, imagine this is happening during the solar eclipse. What is the call here? The call here is for that person to understand that it's not the person in the bookstore that caused them to feel that way. It's because they're very familiar with that and then they internalize it. That's why they felt it. And they have to work with that in a different way so that they pulled out the emotion from within themselves that says you're unworthy, you don't know what you're doing. So in a much same way, the eclipses are working. And because again, we're so full with all those ingrained emotions, which are interpretations of reality. So let's look at the charts now. I think the first chart that I have, and actually the only one, we'll look at the other ones through different. So that's the one. I didn't, the name was not here. So the name was not on the chart. So I don't know.
Ariana.
Ariana. Okay. So is Ariana here?
I'm here.
Okay. So in the light of what I said, I don't know if you hear it, but as I said, I didn't have to say it, of course, you probably know that, but the eclipses are steering emotions within. So many times the whole thing starts a little bit before the eclipse hits. And so we may start feeling a little bit uneasy and something just, it's not right. So I wanted to start the exploration of your chart in relation to this eclipse with the question, because the eclipse is obviously happening let me just get this here out, in the 4th house, right? And it's very close to all these planets and points there. So, and the 4th house on top of everything has to do with the moon and early conditionings and just being as general as possible. Can you say that, not can you say, but did you feel a pressure? Did you feel something that's coming up and brewing to the surface in relation to home environment, personal security, ability to feel nurtured, and all that?
Yes, I definitely felt emotionally charged
Okay.
um, in all ways, really. As far as at home, I felt, just to be straightforward and honest, I cried a lot and felt like I couldn't stop crying, and
Yes.
I didn't know why.
You didn't know why. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So the crying, actually, if you think about the crying, obviously you're not crying when you're, I'm going to talk a little bit in detail here, but when you feel like crying, obviously you don't feel, I mean, you can always differentiate between crying of happiness and crying of sadness, right? So, obviously this was not crying of happiness, right?
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
correct.
So the idea is, and I'm just going to have to change a little bit the settings here because I don't see well the whole chart. Just get this out of here. So, and then the other thing I wanted to ask is, did you feel that you want to say something to somebody or to write something or to something like that?
Kind of, yeah.
Did you do it?
No, no, I felt like I wanted to express the way that I was feeling.
Mhm,
However, I felt like I didn't know how.
mhm. When you say you didn't know how, that's again, it's important. We will talk about emotion because of, again, what I said. The emotion contains within us how we have perceived certain energy. And so you said that you didn't know how to express it or how to do it. Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah, basically I just sometimes or a lot of the time I feel like I don't know how to find the words for how I'm feeling. It's hard for me to find the right words to
Okay.
really express myself.
Okay. Yeah. So when we're talking about expression, obviously, I mean, we're looking at a chart that has Pluto conjunct Mars in the fifth house, right? So with any interpretation of whatever is happening in terms of transits and progression and eclipses, we have to start from the chart because it affects it's in assistance of what the chart signature says. And of course, in the chart signature, we have this Pluto in the fifth house, and we also have the nodes, and the actual north node is in Libra, specifically in the fourth house, and then the south node is in there. So there is the again the nodes are reversed. So in order for us to look at what exactly the calling here is we have to take this into consideration. And so the ruler of the south node happens to be, again, conjuncting that Pluto there in the fifth house. It's not like you don't know your chart. I probably have to address it in a different way, but self-expression. When you're talking about when we're talking about self-expression, when you think about expressing yourself, do you think about expressing yourself with words or expressing yourself in a different way?
With words.
With words. So this is the specific area that you feel like it's not coming up.
Correct. Yeah, I find it difficult to find the words that accurately describe how I'm feeling emotionally.
Okay. But again, when you said accurately, who, and we're talking about here, so what you're saying, of course, is very important in relation to the north and the south node in terms of transits, and also the Pluto squaring the nodes from the 7th house in Capricorn. So accurately, who determines what's accurate and what's not?
Sometimes me, and sometimes who I'm expressing.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like it gets misunderstood.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then sometimes I just give up altogether, as far as expressing myself, because I really can't find a way, or find the,
Mm-hmm.
and so I just don't bother.
Mm-hmm.
For fear of being misunderstood, or fear of it being misinterpreted.
Right, right, right. And so I'm going to ask another question. What happens if you get misinterpreted and misunderstood? What is the fear?
Of somebody taking it the wrong way and becoming offended or defensive, or
do something wrong to them, or you may have made a mistake. And
yeah.
so this is something that you've experienced many times in childhood, let's say.
Yes.
So here is, thank you for that, because it's a deep content, and also it's a great opportunity to show how this works. So I don't want you to think that it's it's kind of a use of your case, because there is deep depth into it. And so we see how the chart has, right next to the IC, we see the moon and Chiron, and then also Mercury, and then after that we have the Ceres and the North Node and the Sun. But especially because we're talking about the reverse nodes, right? Because the South Node is on your North Node, and the North Node transiting is on your South Node. So how important it is, again, we're talking about the axis, the cardinal axis. The cardinal axis that has to do with identity, expression of that identity, the emotional security that supports that, and how this actually builds the right integrity, right? So I mentioned this in one of my talks, which is cooperative talk, about 6 months ago, but you probably are familiar with this doctor from Vancouver, Gabor Mate, and he basically talks about trauma, but the basic thing that he talks about is that every child needs two things from the get-go. The feeling of authenticity, acceptance of their authenticity, and attachment, which is translated into love, right? So if you think about it, it's interesting how this happens. People that are absolutely unrelated to astrology and mostly think of astrology as bogus, actually tapping into this very main axis. If you think about what is attachment and what is the archetype of attachment in the astrological chart, and what is the archetype of authenticity. The authenticity, of course, has to do with Aries and how we express that, and attachment, the law from Cancer, and how we express that. So obviously, we have a lot going on here in terms of that axis, and a lot going on in terms of integrated negative emotions, in terms of how can I express my identity when, I'm told that that's not good. And then if I express it, then somebody else claims that that's too much, or I'm hurting them, right? So this is the theme that's coming from the past for a review. And it's going to come, of course, in the form of emotion, because through emotion, because that moon is you, of course. The perception of that moon needs to change the emotional interpretation, not the emotional interpretation, the interpretation of the environment needs to change. The emotion that's deeply within us, within you in this case, that says, I can't express myself because if I express myself, that's going to cause harm to somebody else, or either way, they're not going to get me. That's the emotion that is trying through this calibration or through this, it's in a way, it's transit to free itself, to identify, to make you identify where is this coming from. Of course, you know where is this coming from, right? So, but there is a need to do something different. So every time, and that's part of the cardinal archetype. Why is it cardinal? Because it initiates, but you know, we've all heard that thing about 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because it's scary. So we cannot initiate change and just go for it forever, because that's not intrinsic to our human consciousness, not in the way we live our lives today, because we live in a very distorted societies. So initiation of change is very difficult. And the initiation itself is not difficult, but maintaining the course is difficult. So not impossible. So how do you, when you say that you want to, you know, write this down, when you sit down and write it, is there going to be anyone that's going to be affected? Just write it for yourself.
No, only me.
So is that something that, so that shouldn't be like, that's not too scary, right?
No, although it does feel frustrating at times. I get frustrated with my inability to find words to express myself.
Yeah, okay. But that's the call here, right? So this is the dynamic that's been repeating, right? I'm afraid I'm bad, better don't do it. But the urge is that Aries North Node in the 10th house, my integrity, which is based on integration of who I am, wants to go ahead and do something. And that something has to do with Mars that is in that 4th house. And it's actually needing to do that expression. And Mercury in the same lunation happens to be so close, 7 degrees apart, between, not between, from both sides, but between your Mercury and your Ceres. So the feeling of, you know, not feeling so comfortable with the expression, you know, in that conjunction, we have the Mercury and the Moon conjunct together, right? Next to the pool of something that needs to be initiated. And then Mars going into the depth, into the 1st degree of Scorpio, very close to your sun. So, and that's the private area of the 4th house. So the call again is, what does it mean if you're not going to be able to, how would you know that you're not able to express yourself if you don't do it, and if you stay locked into the fear that this potentially may not happen?
Right.
Right. So with words will be the only way to do it. Is it possible to do it in singing and yelling to a pillow, or painting, or doing something, a collage or whatever?
Yeah, painting. I find painting really special. Painting is something I really enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. Do you get yourself to, do you allow yourself to get into it, or?
Sometimes, um, when time allows, I do get really lost in it.
Okay. So when you're saying lost in it, give it words to that feeling.
I feel by that, I mean,
It
I
doesn't
feel
need to be the right words, whatever comes. That's important.
I feel like it takes me away from reality for a little bit.
Or maybe the real reality, actually.
Takes me away from, you know, life in the way that it is. I feel I like it's therapeutic,
It
like
did.
a form of meditation in a way, mindfulness.
When you think about therapeutic is healing, right?
Yeah.
So it heals what? I talked about the center of the chart. It's the place where we are absolutely authentic, and without it, that authenticity is not based on approval, right?
Yeah.
So going back to the center is every time we feel good. We feel good because we don't have to ourselves, our self-expression doesn't need to be approved. So the restoration of that self-expression is, I mean, staying home, whatever the home is, because home is always supposed to be a place that we want to stay. Home is not a place that we want to run away from, regardless if it's called family home, whatever. It has nothing to do with it. So that sun is in the 4th house, right? It's very close to the North Node. It's close to Sirius. How do I nurture myself? Obviously, with some sort of Libra type of activity, right? And also, next to that Sirius, there is a Mercury. So my communication, of course, has to happen with myself first. And it has to happen in a very specific, intimate place, because I need to be able to restore the love towards myself. Because that's how the Pluto and the Mars, that's the reason Mars is in that 5th house. And it's initiating the whole journey. That's the reason why Venus is in the 5th house. So there's such a huge 5th house energy. And what makes us feel good is not an escape from reality. That's how we've been conditioned to think. Because we've been conditioned to think that it's normal not to work a job that you want. It's normal to just have a place to stay or to pay rent. Well, first of all, paying for a place to live on Earth is idiotic. But sometimes I ask my clients, and I do it. I don't like the word clients, but the people that I work with, what is their favorite color? And they tell me, and then I ask, so what is the color of your room? And they say a different one. And I mean, this is coming from my own experience because I had to do it myself. And then when I painted the room in the way, in the color I wanted, and that's a color that I did a project when I was 8th grade, and that was the color. And just came on me that, oh my God, yeah, that was the color. So I painted the room that way. And it's almost like I was entering a different room. This was my place. This was my place. So interestingly enough, we're so conditioned to disregard the things that we love and the things that because that's not important. Again, in the name of serving some sort of conditioning, Capricorn, right? Part of this whole archetype. That's why I was saying that when we're looking at those lunations or North Node and South Node, it's important to look at the entirety, the 4 points of the archetype, because it's the totality of it. So if I am constantly concerned with the fact that somebody may not understand me, what does that say? That my personal self-expression is dependent on other people. That's an old emotion that we've internalized. And until that emotion is cleared, it's going to continue to come to the fore, because it needs to be cleared. It doesn't need to be within you anymore. So this is what this it's calling for. It's calling for integration of that you that's being conditioned to think that whoever you are, it doesn't matter. And so I mean, I don't have to suggest anything, because your emotion, again, the way you relate to yourself, as I said, if we're looking at that lunation, that's South Node, Libra, but then the new moon, so there is new something that needs to happen in relation to something old, we have to take actions. So obviously there is a different way in which I can approach my own self. So that's the call here. And the call is to love that self. All this Libra overlay down there is the love of myself, of appreciating myself, of being able to stay in this, to create a place that resonates to who I am. I don't need to explain who I am, because the more you find yourself in a situation or a place or an environment that you don't have to give it words. Then slowly and gradually that environment feeds to you who you are. And that gives you more strength to be able to express yourself. So this is the call here, because ultimately it's connected to restoring that identity and that authenticity. You don't have to, that's the whole point. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. And it can happen through writing naturally. And it's an allowance. It's not an action. It's an allowance. It's a release. So this is what you're experiencing. I mean, I don't want to tell you what you're experiencing, but when we're experiencing, again, going to a different reality, that just only means that the reality, the way it's constructed, it's based on old interpretation of energies, and they're actually needing to maintain themselves. That's not necessarily anymore. So every time we're experiencing a different reality, so to say, or something that's not reality, or escape from reality, that other reality exists. It's just not dominant in your environment. And so I wouldn't approach it as, an escape reality. I would approach it as a reality that needs to become predominant. And so follow also, the other thing I want to say is to follow exactly, that's, another point that I forgot to make, is that the ruler of the south of the lunation, the ruler of the north node, south node in Libra is Venus, and Venus is in your second house in Virgo. So the point is that there has to be a discernment into what I want, what's important for me, regardless of what the previous conditioning was. Is that normal? Is that not normal? Or you're too much, or you want too much, or this is really what you want, that you're not getting this because, that's bullshit. So the idea also here is, and also because that Venus, I mean, I'm referring to the chart because we're talking about astrology. The Venus in opposition to the Saturn from the 8th house is, again, constantly calibrating into, okay, I want this. Somebody's going to tell me that that's not right. The authority that has power over me is going to tell me that that's not right. And so, again, the integration of the opposites is what it needs to happen. Where is that part of me that says, I'm not expressing myself in the right way? Or what I want is not important? Versus those are the specific things that I want because they make my heart sing, and that increases my energy, and I can engage more into them until they become my reality as opposed to the other reality. I think I spoke too much. I want you to, I want to see if you have something to say or just.
It's interesting because I feel like lately I've been feeling that way in regards to what I want and what's important to me. I feel like I've been kind of going back and forth lately about knowing. I feel like I've been second guessing myself when it comes to what's important to me. So that's just what came to mind when you brought that up, because just lately, maybe in the past couple of months, I feel like I've been struggling with that, with knowing what's important to me and what I want.
Yeah, if that was not allowed, of course you're not going to know. You know, we come to this world, and then the good parenting is when the parents identify what we have a natural tendency to, liking of doing, and then to nurture that, to channel it, so that we can experience more and more and more and become better and see. But if this is not nurtured, of course, at the beginning we have to choose different things. I mean, that's normal until you calibrate our consciousness, exactly figure out what exactly is resonating. But this is not allowed. We don't know. We don't know. So the way to figure it out is just go for what comes. And just because you may decide 3 months later that that's not for you, that doesn't mean that that's not a confirmation that you're lost case. That's the thing. And that's exactly, I mean, this is something that again, that's exactly why this new action in terms of past dynamic is happening in the fourth house. It's the intimacy of myself. And so also recognizing who is the voice that comes to your mind and your head, it says, well, you're not expressing yourself right, or you never know what you want. How bad is that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Although I do feel like in childhood, I felt like it was nurtured. I was given the encouragement that was needed. Um, and as an adult, but I just feel like lately I'm at a place where I'm the one second guessing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's just anxieties, um, and uncertainties, and maybe like the state of the world, and just, things are just feeling uncertain and uneasy, and that might be contributing to it. Because I've had this idea in my head for most of my life as to like what I want to do and what's important to me. And in general, it still is. But as far as the details of that and what I want to do with my life, I feel like I'm second guessing myself and feeling a little bit uncertain.
Well,
So,
that's the process, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah, I guess so.
so again, I mean, just the idea of, self-expression,
Yeah,
how important this is for you.
very.
And how would you know in what areas to go and what to engage into unless you're trying certain things? I mean, what's the fear is what I'm trying to kind of feel.
Um, I guess I would say wasting time,
Mm.
having to go backwards,
Hmm.
sense. I feel like I've always had an issue with patience. So I'm a very impatient person, so I tend to have a fear of wasting any time and steering myself in the wrong direction.
Hmm. So when obviously, yeah, that is very important for you, but how do you get there? Like, how do you understand where to which direction to go?
Well, for example, like what's in my mind right now when I talk about this is my education and career. Um, So right now I'm just feeling uncertain and scared about starting a master's program, um, because I'm afraid that I'm going in the wrong direction and that it will be a mistake, that I will change my mind and feel like I'll start my career and say this was a mistake. I should have done something else. So that's where I'm at. And to answer your question of how you get there, I guess I'm just trying to do research and really just try to think about and identify what's important to me.
How
So,
would you know what's important for you? How do you identify that?
well,
What's how are you gonna know? I mean, you've done it in certain areas in your life so far. How do you know what's the thing that calls you?
well, to be specific for me, I've always known that psychology was important to me, and helping people in the area of psychology. And I've always felt like if I don't study psychology, make psychology my life, my career, that I won't feel fulfilled. And additionally to that, in the same way I feel about that, I feel the same way about like art and artistic expression. I feel like I need both of those things in my life and my career to feel um, fulfilled and happy.
Mhm. And the fear is that if you start psychology, that's not gonna, you may be disappointed, or
I know that I want to do something in psychology. It's just I'm worried about the specific degree that I'm going for, that I won't feel fulfilled, like it won't give me enough options, or that it won't be exactly what I want to be doing.
yeah, but do you have
And
what you want to be doing right now? So, yeah, go ahead. No,
Sue
say what you wanted to say.
Sue brought up art therapy, which is something that I've thought about, and I do want to try that. I've looked into that, and that's something that's always been on my mind, and probably something that I'll end up doing someday. So
Yeah. So again, I mean, the way you figure it out is not by, I mean, I'm not saying that you're doing this, but not by, staying into again the old emotion of fear of whether I'm gonna do the right thing or not do the right thing. It's gonna happen through exposure. Even if you go for psychology, there's so many different fields of psychology. And some of them you'll find that they're barely touching the human soul, even in the therapeutic approach that they're having. But some of them go very deep, and some of those practices are not even called psychology. So you're not going to know until you be exposed to that. And so
that's
again, yeah,
scary, because by the time I actually get exposed to that with my practicum hours, clinical hours and stuff like that, I'll be done with my degree.
yeah, there's a lot of requirements that make you feel what exactly is the point. But again, the idea is to find your own way, and the established way is not necessarily the right way. So we're talking about trusting yourself. In order to trust yourself, you have to acknowledge yourself. You
Yeah.
have to acknowledge how special you are, right? You have to allow your feeling nature to tell you what's the right thing for you and what's not the right thing for you. And the criticism, whatever the criticism comes from, is the one that needs to go. So when I was talking about breaking mirrors, it's important to see what are the mirrors that you're looking at and what is it that they're giving you back in terms of your path, if this is the most important thing at this time. you see there is this Aries on the MC, right, in your chart. So you have to embrace the uniqueness to understand that your way will be, it will come in a unique way. And then you also understand that there is a Chiron that's walking through your 10th house. So that could be the old fears of whether I'm going to get it right or I'm not going to get it right. But again, the feeling center is going to tell you what's the right thing to do. And if you have some set ideas of by what age you're supposed to do this and by what age you're supposed to do that, and if I don't do it now, that means I'm, a waste. Again, mirrors. What are the mirrors that you need to just let go and break? Okay.
Yeah, reframing my thoughts is something that I have been needing to work on in this life. So
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any more charts in my slides, so we can look at another chart. I can stop sharing.
Just have to tell me how to share my screen. I think I just go to share screen and then I'll be able to.
Okay. So Perry, I don't know if you listened to it, but I just wanted to approach it in the same way. So obviously we're talking about this cardinal archetype, and then we're talking about the fact that Aries and Libra are the ones that are very activated right now. And so if we look at the chart, they're actually touching on the area of literally the beginning of the 4th house and the 10th house in your chart. So I wanted to ask again if during that time or a little bit before the solar eclipse, you felt triggered in regards to those areas, like
Yeah, I definitely did. It was a strange time because I had like a nose job, so I was recovering from that. It was a strange time. I was sort of recovering, and yeah, I guess it's been for me about like it's interesting, this topic of mirrors. It's been just about identity and where I want to go and that sort of thing. So yeah.
So what was the feeling mostly that was, if you can give it a words, you may not be able to, I don't know, but just if you can,
It was like uh I don't know if I could swear on him, but F it. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna do what I want to do.
right.
Because I traveled America a bit before, and I nearly died once or twice, and it sort of was this sense of like, well, if I'm gonna die, I might, or if I could have died, I might as well do what I want to do.
True. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's sort of what came
Okay.
up.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. So, of course, we have to look at it from the background of the backdrop of the actual chart, and so I have to look at the fact that the Pluto is in the 12th house, right? Yeah, 12th house in Sagittarius. Sagittarius overlaying 2 houses, and also the ascendant. And then we have the natural, not the natural, but the actual nodes from birth in the south node in the 3rd house Pisces, and then we have the north node. Not that you don't know, but just for the sake of the presentation.
Of course.
North node in the 9th house in Virgo. So naturally, in terms of birth and in terms of theme, that is in this life. Obviously, that's a mutable archetype, and so it has its own 4 points. But the mutable archetype also has to do with well, I wouldn't say communication, but it has to do with, again, truth is very, 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 very deep issue, because We have the Pluto in Sagittarius, my truth, and also the capacity to speak up that truth. So I'm not going to go to like a very literal interpretation of the chart, because the important thing is when we're touching on something that is really resonant to you. So you're saying that obviously, if you're saying, fuck it, I need to do what I want to do, obviously I've reached that point. The thing is, what has happened so far that you ended up not doing what you want to do? You made the decisions
mean,
that put you in a reality that you are not liking what you're doing.
I think what I want to do is unconventional. So it's, you know, it's just something that I don't know. I mean, it's all this typical, it's so current, it's all the gender stuff and blah 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 blah. And it's like that has been something that's played on my mind for about 8 or 9 years, but it's very unconventional. So I guess, you know, it's just something that I've decided, well, no, I'm gonna go the easy route and be really masculine, and that's just gonna be my life. But you know, I feel after the nearly dying thing, I was like, well, why am I doing this stuff for other people? Why don't I just live for me a bit?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so why unconventional and, you know, parents and stuff, dad?
Yeah. So when this no, it's not urgent, but that feeling, well, I might as well do what I want to do. Was it what other feelings were there? I mean, obviously that's a very Aryan in terms of, okay, I'm doing it, that's it. But the feeling that was something related to that 10th house dad
Okay.
authority in Libra, not being able to state my ground in terms of authority. So I mean, I hate reading the chart that way because it's so obvious. So and I'm basically reiterating what's been happening, but it's always good to see the validation of it. And we're talking about the Black Moon Lilith in the 10th house in Libra, right? So Black Moon Lilith is also the suppression of the natural instincts, and also where if we accept that and leave them, we're going to feel happy. That's the general interpretation of it. Of course, we can go into depth of that. So that Black Moon Lilith is in 22 degrees of Libra, and that's exactly where the South Node happens to be. And so, right, and then I wanted to ask you in relation to your decision, or I don't know if it's a decision, it's more like a revelation. Did you feel the urge, or to speak out, or to communicate something to somebody, or to just express something in regards to your decision, or
Well, sort of. For me, I felt more than the need to sort of keep it a secret, because I've always expressed it in the past, and it's always sort of stopped me. But I have ended up expressing it, you know, today. Yeah, like today specifically, I guess, because I wanted to know some information about when I was young, and you know, I was getting what I wanted, and I was like, right, I'm just going to say, you know, how everything's gone. And so today,
yeah, so great. I mean, again, the validation to that is I don't think you need it, but because we're talking about astrology, is again that Mercury is exactly conjunct, not exactly, but very close to the new moon, the new initiation in terms of stating again relationship. The cardinal archetype also has to do with gender issues and all that. And I'm not saying issues because it's an issue, but because it has to do with anima animus, and of course that's something that Jung came up with, of course.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, but the integration of it is very important, and so it also has to do with identity, right? I mean, that's part of our identity, and it also has to do, again, if we place that cardinal archetype over your chart, because that's the action. That's where the action is. That's where we are feeling the pressure, and that's where we're feeling that we need to do something. We need to say something. Mercury next to all these combo, and also the Mars that happens to be the ruler of the South Node. I'm sorry, the North Node. The North Node happens in the 21 or 24 of Aries, right? So it falls in your 4th house, and so the ruler of that node is up there in the 17. No, I'm sorry. The ruler is in 1 degree Scorpio. So 1 degree Scorpio is again in the 10th house. So we're talking about deep stuff here. We're talking about vulnerability, and that vulnerability is that expression of that identity. It's connected to vulnerability because it's not safe to become so honest about who you are, right?
Sure.
So the idea, though, because that's the beginning of this lunation cycle. It's the beginning of lunation cycle. It's the beginning of the soul. Of course, tomorrow in 2 days we have the lunar eclipse in Taurus, and so it's interesting how it goes. There is the urge to do something, and that something has to do again with our true identity, or whatever we consider a true identity to be at this stage of our life. And so then the next lunation happens, and that's where, based on the consequences of what we've taken action for, or how exactly that action ended up being, how do you feel about what you did? How did it feel?
Well, when I started taking steps, it felt pretty great, actually. Yeah, I felt noticed, and I felt wanted, and I felt like myself, and I felt like really valued, which was kind of really cool, actually. Yeah, so it did feel really good. Yeah.
So it's almost like the game of hot and cold. The moment you start coming more to your identity, it becomes warmer. Not warmer in terms of humidity. I'm talking warmer in terms of good, welcoming, nurturing.
Yeah, you're right. And then going away from it, yeah, it's like the opposite, like just complete blank.
And so the conditioning was, well, when you're going away from it, again, the security issues and the authority issues, and the Saturn in Aries down there in the 3rd house is, again, what are you doing it for? But it's not easy to state who you are, especially if it's different from the conditioning. So that was actually, and coming out, I don't know if that's the right word in this case, but coming out with the truth. So we have the Pluto, and that's where you're coming from. It was not possible to come out. I'm not saying coming out in terms of the gender issues. I'm generally talking about living in seclusion or not being able to say my truth.
Yeah, I've had that, my whole life, really. So
it's interesting, right? When you look at this Pluto, which is the base from which, this is the deepest emotional security, the deepest emotional imprint that we have and come in to in this life. And it's so tightly connected to Mercury, which has to do with, how can you speak it out? Can you say it? And it's so also interesting that they are in a balsamic conjunction together. So they're completing that whole thing. And you were able to do it this time.
right.
Able to do it. And
Because where it is right now, right.
Yeah. Just the fact, I can't point out, but it's Pluto is in the 4th degree of Sagittarius, and then Mercury is in the 3rd degree of Sagittarius, right?
Yeah.
The 12th house. And so, right. So, what I'm saying, and what I said about this building pressure is, the building pressure is produced by, again, when we start dissociating. Obviously there was a pattern. So we start dissociating from our core, from who we are, from the essence of who we are, or let's say just from the essence of what we have come here to be. Because our consciousness is vast, it has many emanations, or maybe not necessarily. So when we strain away from that, it always feels restrictive, and it always feels like we're not enough, and it always feels like we have to fulfill some sort of requirements and all that, right? And so those solar eclipses and then the nodes, the way they're moving through our charts based on of course the transits, is they're steering an old emotion that is so deep within us that is not serving us anymore, because every emotion that we're used to experiencing, in your case, that could be I have to hide, or I have to be somebody else because of somebody else. Again, this is a cardinal type, and also, yeah, who you are is there. The identity is there. It's gonna talk about the identity. It's gonna reflect the identity. So
Right.
the steering of this emotion, because again, as I said, I mean, I didn't have to say it. It's the way it is. The nodes belong to the moon. So past dynamics have to be released. Past dynamic, what does past dynamic mean? If you think about it, it means the way we interpret reality. It means the way the predominant feeling of I'm not who I am, but I'm going to be like this because it's not safe, or because I don't want to have troubles. This is the feeling that comes in, and it has to be released, because if it's not released, it continues to produce reality in which you're going to have to hide.
Yeah, that's kind of been the reality. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Wow.
So that's the integration, this integration that needs to happen. So the events that happens in those very important moments or periods of time, whatever, it's a trigger event. It's not the end. So now you're gonna start building onto it more, but it's an opening thing.
Yeah, that's kind of how it feels, I guess. Yeah, okay. It's like it keeps yeah, okay. I understand, I think.
Yeah. And you know, the whole idea is to calibrate, to come to the fine-tunement of who you are. And that thing is supposed to be stated out there. That's North Node in your chart is in Virgo. So we have to, you have to, again, the specifics, the being discerned into what is exactly my truth as opposed to what I'm supposed to be, you know, the Piscean realm in which everybody can project onto me whatever they want me to be.
Yeah. But like, what do you actually want? That kind of thing. What do you actually want to be seen?
My value is not determined by, you know, somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And yeah. Do you want to discuss something else?
Sorry, I'm being kind of blank. I don't know, not particularly. I mean, that was mostly what I was interested in finding out about. I'll watch this back as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also supporting what you're saying, the sun in your chart, it happens to be in 11th house in Scorpio.
Yeah.
So the ultimate honesty and expression of my own uniqueness. And that's also part of my truth, because the sun also rules the 9th house, right?
Okay.
Oh no. Okay, I'm sorry. I can't see it well on the screen, but is Leo intercepted in the 8th, or it's not intercepted?
Yeah, I do believe yeah, I do believe so. More than the astrologer. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So that, and it's almost like the interception gets resolved when that sun expresses itself there.
Okay. What do you mean by that? The interception gets resolved?
The interception, it depends. So interception can mean all kinds of different things, but from what you're sharing, we understand. So 8th house is what the depth of who we are. Ultimate, I mean, it's many things. Of course, it's the place where we merge with other sources of power because of we can feel powerless. So that could be sources of money, it could be sources of intimacy, it could be sources of you know, all kinds of deep stuff that makes us feel very very powerful. Why? Because we feel powerless. Obviously, that's the case. So if we, you know, I mean, marriages because of financial reasons, going into all kinds of taboo stuff, because magic gives you some sort of, it's all kinds of stuff like this. And so the insecurity of, but ultimately, because the 8th house is ruled by Pluto, and it has to do with, of course, our soul. Our soul is, I mean, it's not emanation, it's actually our natural energy that comes into this life. So that Leo sign, Leo is, you know, the ultimate self-expression and self-actualization, is literally in between those other signs on top of the 8th house and the 9th house. So, right. And so there is this deep insecurity in expressing the again, what is your power? How can you identify your power? And I'm not saying power in terms of abuse. I'm saying power in terms of strength that comes, and naturally you feel, as we said, the more you get closer to who you are, the more you feel the power of expressing yourself. I mean, the security of expressing yourself, the warmth and nurturing that comes from that, right? So the Cancer on top of it is, you know, that insecurity, of course.
Yeah, a
But,
lot.
right, the insecurity, of course.
Power, insecurity on top of it that sort of pushes it down later on. So, yeah.
Right. And so this is, again, when the sun gets embraced in terms of expressing our sun, right? The place that the sun rules actually gets, you know, really shined out. We shine in that place. So it makes total sense that, I mean, there is, if you see here, there's a mutual reception. So the sun is in Scorpio, and then you have the sun sign on the Scorpio house. So,
Okay.
so there is this, shining at
Yeah.
that personality right there is giving me, the more I go ingrained into the uniqueness of who I am and the strength and the truth of who I am, which is very unique, gives me the sense of power and security.
That makes total sense. Yeah, and then the other thing gets sort of resolved. Yeah. Okay. That's yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And of
No,
course, you can,
really helpful.
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's really helpful to me. Like really helpful.
Well, that's the thing. It's helpful because you've already had the emotional experience of it, right? But it supports, it validates it. Because I can talk to you about this, like 2 years ago, and it may not resonate. It's going to be just a, you know, a thought. Yeah, it sounds really good.
Yeah, it wouldn't have really meant anything to me,
Right.
but I've always felt what you're saying for sure.
Exactly. But it does, because there is the emotional experience. You've already experienced that emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what I was aiming for. And I guess after a certain amount of feeling, you know, powerful and then having insecurity and just knowing exactly what you're saying, it just becomes a clearer picture of like, right, okay, this is when I feel powerful, this is when I don't.
Right.
And this is the insecurity that's sort of pushing me down.
Right.
Yeah. It
Right.
becomes clear over time, I suppose.
Good. You know, the life is not over, it continues, so there's going to be more to it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Yeah, different layers, but it's all geared towards refinement. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. Thank you. I really do appreciate it.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
You're welcome. Okay. What we're gonna do next?
I think we're coming to the end. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to?
I want to say how much I appreciate, guys, all of you, that you share your charts, because it's an ultimate pleasure for me, and to look at them, and it's an honor, because it's almost like the soul is opening itself and allowing for me to look into it, and all of us, and the vulnerability and all that. And also Robin and Sue, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share those thoughts.
It's been awesome. You did a great job, and I also want to acknowledge your volunteers. Both Ariana and Perry were very brave to share what they did, and I for one appreciate it, and you know, I'm sure that people watching this will too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kamelia.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
next time.
Yes, yes, definitely.